The strangest thing about heartbreak is that it can fit inside an envelope. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost threw it away without opening it. Almost. The envelope was thick, expensive, and cream-colored. The kind people use when they want everyone to know their lives turned out exactly the way they planned. My name was written across the front in familiar handwriting. The moment I saw it, my stomach tightened. Jason Parker. 2 years. It had been 2 years since I heard that name spoken out loud. 2 years since I stood in a white dress that never became a wedding dress. 2 years since I learned that forever could disappear with a single conversation. I carried the envelope into my apartment and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then I stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Outside, Manhattan traffic hummed beneath my apartment windows. A siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Life moved forward. It always did. The envelope stayed exactly where it was. Waiting. Eventually, curiosity won. It usually does. I opened it carefully and pulled out the invitation. Elegant gold lettering. Expensive paper. Beautiful design. The wedding of Jason Parker and Madison Reed. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then the photograph slipped out. It landed face up on the counter. Jason stood beside a woman I had never met. His arm around her. His smile bright. Relaxed. Happy. The kind of smile he used to give me. I looked away immediately, then looked back again because apparently pain has its own gravity. There was nothing wrong with the photograph. Nothing cruel. Nothing intentionally hurtful. Yet somehow it felt worse. Because it proved life had continued without me. I sank into a chair and stared at the image. 2 years ago, Jason told me he was not ready for marriage. He told me he needed time, needed space, needed to figure out who he was. 3 months later, he started dating someone else. 6 months after that, they moved in together. Now they were getting married. Apparently, he had figured himself out faster than expected. My phone buzzed. A text message from my best friend, Rachel. Have you checked your mail yet? I laughed despite myself. News. Traveled fast. Too fast. A second message appeared. Please tell me you are not going. I stared at the screen, then at the invitation, then at the photograph. The truth was, I did not know. Part of me wanted to stay home. Another part wanted to walk into that wedding looking completely unaffected. Strong. Successful. Untouchable. The version of myself I pretended to be on social media. My phone rang. Rachel. I answered. You got it, did you not? She asked immediately. I got it. Silence. Then a sigh. Olivia. You do not owe anyone anything. I looked down at the photograph again. I know. Then why do you sound like that? Because somewhere deep down, a tiny part of me still wanted him to regret it. I never said those words out loud. Instead, I folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. But before I could put everything away, my eyes landed on the RSVP card. +1 included. And for the first time all afternoon, an idea crossed my mind. A terrible idea. The kind of idea that changes everything. Terrible ideas rarely announce themselves as terrible. They arrive disguised as confidence. The next morning, I was still staring at the RSVP card while drinking coffee that had already gone cold. +1 included. Such an innocent phrase. 2 simple words capable of causing enormous trouble. I should have declined. Any reasonable person would have declined. Instead, I found myself imagining the wedding day. Walking into a ballroom alone. Smiling politely while pretending I did not notice the whispers. Pretending it did not matter that the man waiting at the altar was once supposed to be waiting for me. The image made my stomach twist. My phone rang again. Rachel, please tell me you are not doing what I think you are doing. I laughed. That depends. Olivia. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had known me for 15 years. You have that tone. What tone? The tone that appears right before you make a terrible decision. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What if I brought someone? Silence. Then a groan. No. Why not? Because you do not have someone. She was correct. Painfully correct. My dating life had been so uneventful that even my mother had stopped asking questions. Details, I said. That is a problem for future Olivia. Rachel sighed dramatically. Future Olivia is going to hate present Olivia. We ended the call a few minutes later, but the idea refused to leave. By lunchtime, it had grown roots. By dinner, it felt almost reasonable, which should have been my first warning sign. 3 days later, I attended a networking event at a luxury hotel in Midtown. Interior design projects had been slow recently, and free business opportunities were difficult to ignore. The ballroom overflowed with polished smiles, expensive watches, and conversations about investments. I spent most of the evening pretending to enjoy myself. Around 8 o'clock, I escaped to a quieter lounge near the back of the hotel. Soft jazz drifted through the room. Dim lighting reflected off dark wood walls. For the first time all evening, I could hear myself think. I ordered sparkling water and settled into a corner chair. Then I noticed him. Not because he was trying to attract attention. Quite the opposite. He sat alone near the far window, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Dark hair, calm expression, the kind of presence that somehow made everyone around him seem less important. People approached his table occasionally. They spoke briefly, respectfully. Then they left. No one lingered. Something about that fascinated me. He looked completely comfortable being alone. I envied that. Across the room, a group of guests laughed loudly. Someone mentioned weddings. The word immediately pulled my thoughts back to Jason. Back to the invitation. Back to the +1 card sitting on my kitchen counter. Before I could stop myself, I laughed under my breath. The stranger glanced up. Our eyes met for half a second. Embarrassed, I looked away. A few moments later, a waiter accidentally bumped my chair while passing. My purse slipped from my lap. Contents scattered across the floor. Lipstick, keys, business cards. And somehow, because the universe enjoys humiliating people, Jason's wedding invitation slid across the polished wood floor and stopped directly beside the stranger's table. I froze. He bent down first, picked it up, then looked at the elegant gold lettering on the envelope. When he raised his eyes to mine again, something told me the night had just become far more interesting than I planned. For a second, neither of us moved. The invitation remained in his hand while I stood frozen beside my chair, wishing the floor would open and save me from the situation. The stranger glanced from the envelope back to me. There was no amusement in his expression, no judgment either. Somehow that made everything worse. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, the kind of voice people listen to without realizing they are doing it. I walked over and accepted the invitation. "Thank you. You are welcome." That should have been the end of the conversation. Any normal person would have returned to their table and forgotten the entire incident. Instead, I noticed the corner of his mouth shift slightly. Not quite a smile. More like curiosity. "You do not seem very excited about attending." Heat immediately rushed to my face. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." I laughed despite myself and slipped into the empty chair across from him. "Only for a minute," I told myself. Only because I was embarrassed. It is my ex-fiancé's wedding. The words sounded ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. "That explains it." He leaned back slightly. "And yet you are still going." "That is the current plan." "Current plan?" I sighed. "Ask me again tomorrow." For the first time, an actual smile appeared. Small, brief, unexpectedly warm. Fair answer. A waiter arrived with fresh drinks. Without asking, he ordered another sparkling water for me. The staff member nodded immediately and disappeared. Something about that exchange caught my attention. People seemed eager to accommodate him. Not because they were afraid, because they respected him. The realization made me curious. "Do you come here often?" I asked. "Occasionally." "Not helpful." "And what do you do?" His smile returned. "That depends who is asking." A woman whose evening was just ruined by a wedding invitation. He considered that for a moment. "Business. That is suspiciously vague." "It usually works." I laughed again. The strange thing was how comfortable the conversation felt. We were complete strangers. Yet talking to him required less effort than most conversations I had every day. Maybe it was because he listened. Maybe it was because he never tried to impress me. Eventually his gaze drifted toward the invitation resting on the table. "You do not have to go." "I know." "Then why do it?" I stared at the gold lettering. The answer came before I could stop it. "Because I do not want him to think he broke me." Silence settled between us. Not awkward. Thoughtful. When I finally looked up, something in his expression had changed. As if he understood more than I intended to reveal. "And did he asked quietly. The question landed harder than expected. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then smiled weakly. "Some days are better than others." He nodded once. No advice. No pity. Just understanding. A few moments passed before I heard myself say something completely reckless. Something so ridiculous that even now I cannot believe I said it out loud. "Would you ever go to a wedding with someone you barely know?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. I felt my heart immediately begin to race. Because suddenly, my terrible idea no longer felt theoretical. The moment the question left my mouth, I wanted to take it back. Every terrible decision in my life seemed to begin exactly this way. A moment of emotion, a complete lack of common sense, and a stranger looking at me as though he was trying to decide whether I was serious. For several seconds, he said nothing. The sounds of the lounge continued around us. Glasses clinked. Soft music played. Conversations drifted through the room. Yet somehow everything felt distant. That depends, he finally said. On what? On why she is asking. I laughed nervously. Fair enough. Then, because honesty suddenly seemed easier than pretending, I told him the truth. Not every detail. Not the entire story. Just enough. I told him about Jason. About the engagement. About the wedding that never happened. About receiving the invitation. About spending days pretending I did not care. He listened without interrupting. Without checking his phone. Without offering solutions. Most people listened so they could respond. He listened because he genuinely wanted to understand. When I finished, he glanced toward the invitation again. And you think arriving with a stranger fixes that? Probably not. Then why do it? I stared into my glass. The answer came quietly. Because I am tired of feeling like the woman who got left behind. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Recognition. As though he understood the feeling better than I realized. He rested one arm against the table and looked directly at me. People who leave are not always the winners. The statement caught me off guard. That sounds personal. A faint smile appeared. Maybe it is. Before I could ask another question, a sharply dressed man approached our table. The moment he arrived, his posture changed. Respect filled his voice immediately. Mr. Blackwell, the meeting is ready whenever you are. Mr. Blackwell. The name meant nothing to me. Yet the way the man said it certainly did. The stranger nodded once. Give me 5 minutes. The man left instantly. Not hurried. Not frightened. Simply respectful. I watched the exchange carefully. You are important. He looked amused. That is a dangerous assumption. People do not speak to ordinary businessmen like that. Maybe they should. I laughed. Then silence settled between us again. Comfortable this time. Unexpectedly comfortable. Finally, he picked up the invitation and studied it for a moment before placing it back on the table. When is the wedding? 3 weeks. He nodded slowly, then stood. I assumed the conversation was ending. Instead, he adjusted his suit jacket and looked down at me. If you still need someone to attend in 3 weeks, call me. My heart skipped. You are serious? I do not make many jokes. He reached into his pocket and handed me a simple business card. No company logo. No flashy title. Just a name. Nathan Blackwell. A phone number beneath it. Nothing else. I stared at the card. Then back at him. You barely know me. That is true. And you would really go? Another small smile touched his face. You asked. Before I could think of a response, he turned and walked away. Several people greeted him as he crossed the room. Others stepped aside without being asked. The entire atmosphere seemed to shift around him. I looked down at the card resting in my hand. Somehow, what started as a ridiculous fantasy no longer felt impossible. And for the first time since the invitation arrived, I found myself wondering whether attending the wedding might change more than I ever expected. For the next 2 weeks, Nathan Blackwell's business card sat on my desk like a dare. Every morning, I told myself I was not going to call him. Every evening, I found myself looking at it again. Meanwhile, the wedding grew closer. Rachel remained firmly opposed to my plan. You met him once, she reminded me over lunch. Exactly once. Technically true. Olivia. She lowered her sandwich and pointed at me. This is how people end up in documentaries. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. You are being dramatic. I am being realistic. Yet even Rachel had to admit there was something unusual about the situation. The stranger from the hotel had never pressured me, never contacted me, never tried to insert himself into my life. He simply handed me a card and disappeared. That should have made the decision easier. Somehow it made it harder. 3 days before the RSVP deadline, I finally called. The phone rang once, twice. Then his voice appeared. Calm. Familiar. Nathan Blackwell. I suddenly forgot every word I planned to say. This is Olivia. A brief pause. Then I heard amusement in his voice. I was beginning to think you changed your mind. I almost did. Almost. I smiled despite myself. Frequently. Silence lingered for a moment. Comfortable somehow. So he said, have you decided? I looked out the window of my apartment toward the Manhattan skyline. The wedding invitation rested on the kitchen counter exactly where I left it. Would you still be willing to come? Yes. No hesitation. No questions. Just yes. My heart skipped. You do not even know the details. Then tell me. We spent the next 20 minutes discussing dates, locations, schedules, and logistics. The entire conversation felt surprisingly normal considering the circumstances. When we finished, Nathan said something unexpected. There is one condition. My stomach immediately tightened. What condition? Dinner. Dinner. Before the wedding. I blinked. Why? Because if I am going to pretend to know you, I should probably know you. I laughed. That is annoyingly reasonable. I have been told that before. 2 nights later, I arrived at a restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. The setting sun painted the water gold. New York glowed beyond the glass walls. When Nathan entered the room, something strange happened. Conversations did not stop. Nobody stared. Yet people noticed. Waiters greeted him by name. Managers appeared instantly. Guests nodded respectfully. The same thing had happened at the hotel. For the first time, I found myself wondering exactly what kind of businessman inspired that reaction everywhere he went. During dinner, he asked about my work, my family, my favorite places in the city. He listened carefully to every answer. Hours passed without effort. At one point, I caught myself laughing so hard that tears formed in my eyes. The realization startled me. I had not felt this relaxed around someone new in years. As the evening ended, we stepped outside beneath the city lights. Cars moved along the waterfront. The river shimmered in the darkness. Nathan looked at me for a moment before speaking. You know, he said quietly, I do not think this wedding is going to go the way you expect. Standing there beneath the Manhattan skyline, I suddenly had a feeling he was right. The wedding day arrived beneath a clear autumn sky. I spent nearly an hour standing in front of my bedroom mirror questioning every decision that had brought me to this moment. The dress was elegant but simple. Dark blue. Timeless. The kind of dress chosen by a woman trying to look confident even when she was not entirely sure she felt that way. By 10 o'clock, my nerves were impossible to ignore. Then my phone buzzed. A single message. I am outside. Nathan. Somehow those 3 words steadied me. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, I immediately understood why. Nathan stood beside a black luxury sedan wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He looked exactly as composed as the first night I met him. Calm, confident, unbothered by the world around him. When he saw me, a faint smile appeared. You look beautiful. The compliment was simple, honest, not exaggerated. Somehow that made it more meaningful. Thank you, I replied. You clean up nicely yourself. His smile widened slightly. During the drive, we talked about everything except the wedding. Movies, travel, terrible coffee, the traffic crossing into Connecticut. Anything that kept my thoughts from spiraling. Yet the closer we came to the venue, the quieter I became. Nathan noticed immediately. You can still leave. I looked out the window toward the sprawling estate appearing in the distance. White stone architecture. Perfect landscaping. Luxury cars lining the entrance. No. Are you sure? I nodded. I am tired of running from things. He studied me for a moment before giving a single approving nod. Good answer. The ceremony was being held at one of the most expensive venues in the state. The kind of place designed to impress people before they even stepped inside. Valets hurried between vehicles. Guests in designer clothing gathered near the entrance. Laughter drifted across the courtyard. For a brief moment, old insecurities returned. Then Nathan stepped beside me. Not touching me. Not leading me. Simply standing there. And somehow the anxiety lost some of its power. Together we walked toward the entrance. The effect was immediate. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. People noticed Nathan before they noticed me. Staff members greeted him respectfully. Several guests nodded as though recognizing someone important. One older gentleman actually crossed the room to shake his hand. My curiosity grew with every step. How do so many people know you? I whispered. New York is a small place. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting today. Before I could argue, the ballroom doors opened. Music floated through the air. Crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of guests. Elegant floral arrangements filled the room. Then it happened. Jason looked up. Across the crowded ballroom, our eyes met for the first time in 2 years. I watched recognition appear. Then surprise. Then confusion. His gaze shifted from me to Nathan. Whatever expression followed was impossible to miss. It looked very much like a man realizing the story he expected to see had suddenly changed. And for the first time since receiving that invitation, I did not feel broken. I did not feel abandoned. I did not feel like the woman left behind. I simply felt free. The ceremony ended beneath a canopy of white roses and soft music, but the real drama began afterward. Guests spilled into the reception hall carrying champagne glasses and polite smiles. Everywhere I looked, people were talking, laughing, celebrating. Yet every few minutes, I caught someone glancing in our direction. At first, I assumed they were curious about me. Then I realized they were looking at Nathan. The realization became impossible to ignore when the bride's father crossed half the ballroom just to greet him personally. A few minutes later, the owner of a major real estate company did the same. Then a state senator. Then someone whose face I recognized from television. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Respect, admiration, careful attention. Nathan handled every interaction with calm professionalism. But I noticed something interesting. The moment each conversation ended, his attention returned to me, as though none of those people mattered as much as the woman standing beside him. It was a strange feeling, a comforting one. "Who exactly are you?" I finally asked. Nathan smiled into his glass. "You have asked that question several times. Because you never answer it. Perhaps I enjoy keeping some mystery." Before I could respond, another familiar voice interrupted. "Olivia." Every muscle in my body tightened. I turned. Jason stood a few feet away. Same smile. Same confident posture. Same blue eyes I once thought I would spend the rest of my life looking at. Yet something felt different now. Not about him. About me. For the first time, seeing him did not hurt. It felt like looking at an old photograph. Familiar. Distant. Finished. "Hello, Jason." His gaze shifted briefly toward Nathan before returning to me. "Could we talk?" A year ago, I would have said yes immediately. 2 years ago, I would have followed him anywhere. Today, I glanced at Nathan first. He simply nodded once, giving me the choice. Not the permission. The choice. There was a difference. Jason led me toward a quieter terrace overlooking the gardens. The autumn air felt cool against my skin. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled. "You look happy." I almost laughed. Of all the things he could have said, that was not what I expected. "I am." He studied me carefully. "I did not think you would come." Neither did I. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. Who is he? There it was. The real question. I looked back through the glass doors toward the reception hall. Nathan stood surrounded by guests. Yet somehow he still looked completely separate from the crowd. "A friend," I said. Jason nodded slowly. "He does not seem like an ordinary friend." I smiled. "No, he does not." Silence settled between us. Then Jason surprised me. "I made a mistake." The words hung in the air between us. Years ago, hearing them would have changed everything. I might have cried. I might have hoped. I might have imagined a different ending. Instead, I simply listened. Because the strange truth was that I no longer needed those words. Not from him. Not from anyone. And standing there beneath the evening sky, I realized something important. The person I came to impress was no longer Jason. It was the woman I used to be. Jason looked away toward the gardens, his hands resting against the stone railing. The reception music drifted through the open doors behind us. Laughter, glasses clinking, the sounds of a celebration continuing without pause. "I spent a long time thinking I made the right choice," he said quietly. "I told myself it was practical, sensible, easier." I listened without interrupting. Once upon a time, I would have searched every word for hidden meaning. Tonight, I simply heard them for what they were. A confession arriving years too late. "And now?" I asked. Jason smiled sadly. "Now I think I was afraid." The honesty surprised me. More importantly, it no longer changed anything. For years I believed closure would arrive with a dramatic apology or a perfect explanation. The truth was much simpler. Closure arrived the moment I stopped needing one. Jason looked at me again. "I hurt you." "Yes. I am sorry." The words landed softly. No anger followed. No bitterness. Just acceptance. I nodded once. "I know." His eyes searched my face as though looking for the woman he remembered. The woman who would have waited. The woman who would have hoped. The woman who would have chosen him without hesitation. She was gone. Not because of Nathan. Because life had forced her to grow. After a moment, Jason laughed quietly to himself. "You really are happy." "I am." "Is it because of him?" I followed his gaze back toward the ballroom. Nathan stood speaking with several guests. Yet somehow he appeared completely untouched by the attention surrounding him. Calm. Steady. Certain. No, I said. It started before him. Jason looked confused. What does that mean? I smiled. It means I finally remembered who I was. For the first time all evening, he nodded as though he truly understood. We stood in silence for another few seconds before he extended his hand. Not as a former fiancé. Not as someone asking for another chance. Simply as a person making peace with the past. I shook it. Then we returned inside. The reception hall seemed brighter than before. Lighter somehow. As though leaving that conversation behind had created space for something new. Nathan noticed me immediately. He excused himself from the group around him and walked over. Everything okay? He asked. Yes. You look different. I laughed softly. Different how? His eyes held mine for a moment. Relieved. The word caught me off guard because it was true. For the first time in 2 years, I felt completely free. As the evening continued, I finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been growing in my mind all day. Who are you really, Nathan? He smiled. Not surprised. Almost as if he expected it. I own several companies. That part one figured out. And I spend most of my time solving problems. That still sounds suspiciously vague. He laughed. Quietly. Then his expression softened. The truth. I nodded. He glanced around the ballroom before lowering his voice slightly. When you asked me to come here, I said yes because I recognized something in you. What? Someone trying to prove they still had value after another person failed to see it. The words stole my breath. Because they felt less like an observation and more like a truth I had been carrying for years. Nathan's gaze never left mine. I know what that feels like. And in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of people, the most important conversation in the room belonged only to us. The reception slowly gave way to evening. Guests drifted onto terraces overlooking the gardens. Music softened. Conversations became quieter, more personal. Somewhere during those final hours, I stopped thinking about why I came and started paying attention to where I was. Nathan and I found ourselves walking along a stone path illuminated by small lanterns. The noise from the celebration faded behind us. Cool autumn air carried the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt easy, comfortable. The kind that only exists when two people no longer feel the need to impress each other. You were right, I said finally. Nathan glanced toward me. About what? This day did not go the way I expected. A smile touched his face. No, it did not. We continued walking. Ahead of us, the lights from the ballroom reflected against a small lake beyond the gardens. The scene looked almost unreal, like something from a memory instead of real life. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. I took a breath. Why did you really say yes? Nathan was quiet for a moment, longer than usual. When he finally answered, his voice carried a sincerity I had not heard before. Because when you talked about that invitation, you never sounded angry. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? Most people would have focused on revenge, embarrassment, pride. He looked at me. You were focused on proving to yourself that you could walk into that room and be okay. I considered that. Slowly, I realized he was right. Somewhere along the way, the wedding had stopped being about Jason. It had become about me. About whether I could face the past without letting it define my future. Nathan stopped walking and looked out across the water. That takes courage. The words settled quietly between us. I laughed softly. I spent 2 years feeling anything but courageous. Maybe courage is not about how you feel. His gaze met mine again. Maybe it is about what you do anyway. For a moment, neither of us looked away. Then a familiar voice called my name from behind. Rachel hurried toward us, smiling so widely that I immediately knew what was coming. There you are. She pointed dramatically between the two of us. I knew it. I laughed. You knew what? That this was never about the wedding. Nathan looked amused. Is that so? Rachel folded her arms triumphantly. Absolutely. Before I could defend myself, she shook her head. Olivia, do you realize this is the happiest I have seen you in years? The question caught me off guard. Because the answer was yes. Not because Jason regretted anything. Not because people stared when we entered the ballroom. Not because I finally received an apology. I was happy because I no longer needed those things. The weight I carried for 2 years was gone. Somewhere between receiving that invitation and walking through those doors tonight, I had found my way back to myself. Later, as the evening came to an end, Nathan escorted me back toward the entrance. Guests were leaving. Cars lined the driveway. The celebration was almost over. We paused beside his car. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. So, I replied. What happens next? I looked at him beneath the glow of the estate lights and realized something beautiful. For the first time in a very long time, I was not looking backward. I was looking forward. I do not know, I admitted. But I think that is the best part. Nathan smiled. Then he opened the passenger door. And as we drove away from the place where my past finally stopped controlling my future, I understood something I wish I had known years earlier. The greatest victory is not making someone regret losing you. The greatest victory is becoming so happy that you no longer need them to.